Hello and welcome back to the Ash and Stone channel. My name is Chris, and today we'll have a look at the newish giant wolves Northstar have produced. Of course, the plastic wolves from the Wolfrider box are a little controversial, shall we say. There are some very strong opinions on them. I like them, but I can absolutely see why others do not. They are solid, well-groomed beasts, and if you want your goblins on something more wild and rangy, you can see why they might not be suitable. Northstar have heard that feedback and now produce these bad boys. 3 poses, in metal, and they are gorgeous. Caked in fur detailing, they are lean and fierce. I've already stuck one of the metal goblins down. The fit was fantastic. I used a little putty between pieces to ensure I had the best bond possible, but you'd definitely get away without it. Because I already have a bunch of Wolfriders done and dusted, I want to approach this guy a little differently from the others. Its leaner and meaner look has me in mind of my Barghists, and so I'm going to paint it up as either a small Barghist or some sort of nightmarish crossbreed between a Barghist and a riding wolf, a fitting mount for a Goblin King. As such, I've given it a sprayed on undercoat of black, which I've touched up with a brush because it was a pretty poor job. On top of that, I hit it with a heavy dry brush of Vallejo black grey. This picks up all that lovely sculpted fur detail. I mix in a touch of US grey, just enough to lighten it a little, and do a lighter dry brush along the top of the model, around its face, and on all of the areas of longer fur. I don't like to go too light on the highlights when doing black, as it's very easy to make the fur look grey as opposed to black, so I keep it dark. Vallejo basic skin tone is painted into the wolf's mouth and around its gums in a couple of coats. This will give us a nice contrast to the black of the fur and give us the pinky flesh tone of the inside of its mouth. And this is given a wash of army painted dark tone. Often dog or wolf gums and mouths have dark black spots and splotches, and this, in addition to shading the recesses, will help to represent that. While I wait for that to dry, I use Vallejo Scarlet Blood to hit the eyes. I'm going for a glowing red Barghist eyes, so I start with a nice bright red across the entire eye. A spot of Vallejo Sunset Orange in the centre will give us a rudimentary glow, but we'll be enhancing this later on in the process. By now the black wash has dried and I use Vallejo Off-White to pick out the teeth. Against the black fur, the eyes and teeth really pop. That's the wolf largely done, so from there I move on to the goblin, starting with the skin and Vallejo light grey-green. I've moved away from the bright green of my earlier goblins and I like the muted grey-green. It gives them a darker, less cartoony vibe than the bright green does. 2 coats of that are followed with a coat of Army Painter Speed Paint Gravelord Grey. This gives the skin a lighter tone than the grim black I use on the orcs, but it still adds all of the shading I want. When that is dried, a little black is used to pick out the eyes. A horizontal line across the whole eyeball does the job. Then the whites of the eyes are picked out with a small vertical line of white on either side of the eye. I make a bit of a mess here, but a little black can be used to tidy things up. Then the off-white comes out again and is used to pick out the teeth of the goblin. Once again, the bright white of the teeth contrasts nicely with the darker skin tone. From there, it's back in with the light grey-green to reapply the base to the skin, leaving the speed paint down in the recesses. Sometimes I like to do the eyes and teeth before finishing the skin, as it means that mistakes can be cleaned up as I go, rather than having to backtrack and redo areas of finished skin I messed up. Sometimes I don't, depends on the day. In either case, a spot of Vallejo Silver Grey is mixed into the light grey-green to make a highlight, which is applied to the high points on the skin or areas that I wish to make more prominent, like the cheeks and upper lip, and the fingers. Vallejo Natural Steel is used as a base for all of the steel areas. In this case, the mail, scimitars, and the helmet. And that is given a coat of Army Painter Speed Paint Grim Black to shade it and give me that rough forge blackened look I so enjoy. The trousers are picked out with Vallejo Grey Violet, keeping them fairly neutral but with a hint of colour, before they are washed with Army Painter Dark Tone to shade them. As the trousers are quite prominent on the side of the wolf, I then reapply the base colour of Grey Violet to tidy things up. The wash was rather messy, but it's done its job down in the recesses. Vallejo Armour Brown is used for the tunic under the mail shirt. This helps tie him in with the other orcs and goblins, who use this as one of their tunic colours. 2 coats gives me a nice even base. This is washed with Army Painter Strong Tone to give us our shading, and then it's back in with the Armour Brown to reapply that base colour, leaving the wash in the recesses. A highlight is mixed by adding a little Iraqi sand to the Armour Brown. Only a touch though, a little goes a long way. And this is applied as a ragged, uneven edge along the hem of the tunic. He might be high status as far as goblins go, but he's still a goblin, so raggedy cloth it is. That's the tunic done, so now I hit the areas of leather with Vallejo Chocolate Brown. Boots, belt, pouches, bracer, the usual mix. As is tradition, Vallejo Flat Earth is used next to add areas of wear to the leather. So it's applied unevenly on edges and high spots, places the equipment is likely to rub and be worn. It does not need to be tidy, and it is not a highlight in the traditional sense. Dark sand is of course our next step, and it's used to mark in scratches and wear on the leather that go through the dyed surface to the raw leather beneath. I keep these marks small and fine when focused on the edges that are likely to wear, and make it heavier on areas such as the toes or the underside of the boots that are likely to be quickly worn away. The leather is finished off with a wash of Army Painter Strong Tone, which performs double duty. It shades the leather, making the recesses nice and dark and highlighting the details, and it helps to tie the somewhat disparate colours together. Now I move on to the cloak and I base it with Vallejo Black Red. This will give me a nice deep dark base for a vibrant red cloak. I also hit the cloth hanging down from the sides of his helmet, and the grips on his scimitars. Vallejo Gory Red will be our first highlight. This will give us a nice rich mid-tone when painted on the folds of the cloth, leaving the black red down in the deeper recesses. Reds are often very transparent paints, and it can be hard to get a nice finish on them, especially over a black or white base. But the black red gives us a nice intermediary colour. Thin areas of gory red will still look red rather than patchy black or white. A second coat of gory red can be applied if needed to a smaller area, leaving a smoother transition between the black and gory reds. Vallejo Scarlet Blood is used to pick out the highlights. This is a very vibrant red and is applied on the highest areas of the folds and along the edge of the cloak and cap, making the material really pop. I also use it to pick out the highlights on the scimitar grips. I grab some more black and tidy up the fur cloak on the goblin's shoulders, making sure I've got a nice even black over the whole surface, and tidying up any areas where I've painted over the lines with other colours. About this time I decide that the changes in colour on the cloak are a little bit starker than I would like, and so I give the areas of red a wash with army paint, a red tone. Just like the strong tone on the leather, this deepens the shading in the recesses and helps tie the three reds together. The red is still bright, but the wash eases the transition between the different shades. Right, back to that fur. Just like the wolf mount, I dry brush on Vallejo Black Grey to pick out the detail of the fur, and then mix in a spot of US Grey to give us a highlight. Vallejo Iraqi sand is next, and I use it to pick out the horns on the goblin's helmet, giving them a couple of coats to make sure I get a nice even finish. And then the horns are given a highlight of Vallejo off-white. This is mainly focused on the tips and works down towards the base in fine lines to give an almost wood grain-like transition between the colours. That's all of the flat colours completed, so the model is given a blast of Tamiya Flat Clear to knock back any unwanted shine and provide a protective layer to the paint job so far. Removing that shine also does a great job of making the colours really come to the fore. Fluorescent red is our next stop, and it's used to pick out the eyes of the wolf. This will give the eyes a really vibrant glow when they catch the light, adding to the effect we've already got. And then I begin to add metallics. Citadel Warp Lock Bronze is up first, and I use this to put down a base on the scale vest, being careful not to hit anything we've already done. I also use it to base the guard and pommel of the scimitars. Vallejo Bright Bronze is used to pick out the individual scales of the armour, leaving the Warplock Bronze in the recesses. I also add a scratchy, uneven highlight to the bronze of the scimitars. Adding these highlights in an uneven manner helps to give the illusion of wear on these parts of the weapons. They're not perfectly polished, but instead scratched and dinged. Well used. To add depth to the areas of steel, I give them a generous wash of Vallejo Rust Wash. This just adds an extra layer to the metal and gives it a little more life. It's applied fairly generously over the scimitar blades, a little more patchy on the mail as I don't want the recesses flooded with rust, and as a light coat over the steel of the helmet. Out comes the natural steel once more. I pick out the studs on the bracer and apply a heavy dry brush over the scimitars, mail and helmet. This picks out the high points and adds a scratchy effect to the smoother areas of steel that contrast nicely with the darker and slightly rusty base. Finally, I pick out some spots along the edges of the helmet and scimitars to add scratches and wear along the edges. Vallejo Steel is used for a similar purpose. It's applied along the edges of the scimitar to give us a sharp bevel, and picks out some sharper scratches on the helmet and mail. This all builds up the story of wear and use in the goblin's equipment. I also use steel to pick out some of the plaques along the goblin's belt. These are likely to be silver, but as the Vallejo steel and silver paints are quite similar, I save myself getting one paint out. Vallejo Glorious Gold is next, and it's used to base the remaining areas of decoration on the goblin. I pick out the decoration of the helmet's nasal, the clasps of the fur on the shoulders, the belly plate, and the arm rings. A couple of coats are needed in places to make sure I get an even finish. A spot of steel is mixed into the gold to give me a highlight, and it's used to pick out the edges of the gold to help define them a little more. A touch of Army Painter light tone is applied to the rivet on the helmet's nasal plate to make that pop. And finally, a bit of gloss varnish is painted in and around the wolf's mouth to give us some slavering drool. With the base done, that's the miniature completed. It was looking a little bland when we hit it with a flat spray, but once those metallics went on, everything came together, and we've got a Goblin King in his full war glory. The wolf model is glorious. It is significantly better than the plastic wolves, and I say that as someone who likes the plastic ones. The new metal ones are on a new level. I hope you've enjoyed the process. We'll see you next time. Cheers.